Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Week 13 Top 25 predictions. As you can see on the screen in front of you, we've got quite a few really good games this weekend. But without saying too much, a like and subscribe and up a comment always helps. Let's get straight into this thing. But before we do that, I did this last video. I'm doing it again. I'm shouting out my boss's channel. If you like guns and you like shooting guns, go check out this channel because he's a pretty cool guy. UNLV has San Jose State, a team that a lot of people have completely forgotten is UNLV. Because they started off, on a heater with a road win against Kansas, which looked pretty good. They got put into the top 25 before they dropped one to Syracuse, which, wouldn't really necessarily say dropped one. Syracuse is a 3-loss team in the ACC and one of the better teams in the ACC. And they lost it in overtime. Then they lost a 5-point game to Boise State. Those are their only 2 losses, and UNLV has been quietly winning games since that point, and people have kind of forgotten about this team. San Jose State could have beaten Boise State, but they let it slip away from them, but I didn't expect them to. They're really not that good of a team, and I expect UNLV to continue down the path they're going. San Jose State is really offensive, not very much defense. And UNLV has had a better defense this year, but still a pretty high-powered offense at times. I think UNLV will be the team to play Boise State in the Mountain West Championship, except Colorado State is also quietly winning games, which does not look good for the Mountain West, I'll tell you that, because Colorado State got shut out 52-0 against Texas, and they got clobbered by Colorado. And Colorado State has been winning out this conference. Those are their only 2 losses or I guess they lost in double overtime against Oregon State, but that's not a conference game. They've won every single conference game. They're undefeated in conference play. So Colorado State could sneak into that spot, which would not be epic. And they could probably continue down that path. They've got a difficult one against Fresno State, but that is the only thing holding UNLV out of the conference championship right now. Because I believe if if Colorado State loses one, they'd have a 7-4 record, or at least an 8-4 record, and UNLV wins out, they'd have a 10-2 record. So I think they'd get in over Colorado State. And I expect them to win out, and maybe Colorado State can lose, but I don't know. Indiana at Ohio State. Ohio State is favored by 12 points. And let me just say, as an ASU fan, when teams get disrespected like this and just disregarded for a lot of the season, now the difference between ASU and Indiana was ASU never got ranked until this past week. Indiana got ranked, but only because they weren't losing. You kind of have to rank an undefeated team at that point. But Indiana has only won the games on their schedule, and they're up to number 5, but yet people continue to just smash this team with overrated. Strength of schedule isn't difficult. Now this is their opportunity to prove themselves, and Ohio State is definitely struggling. They have a pretty beaten up O-line right now. And there's been examples of Ohio State struggling to perform. I wouldn't count the Penn State game as a struggling performance because Penn State is good. Although it was a difficult game, Penn State is number 4. But the Nebraska game, you look comparatively, Indiana absolutely killed Nebraska, and Ohio State barely beat Nebraska. If Nebraska wasn't if they just didn't beat themselves down at that last drive, they could have beaten Ohio State. Can't look at football like that where you make this triangle of wins and losses of the same teams, but I'm just saying Ohio State has struggled, and they have struggled in their home stadium. Maybe not many examples, but they have. And I don't think Ohio State plans on losing this game. I don't think they plan on taking this team for granted. I just don't think they're going to expect the Indiana team that's going to show up. I think Indiana has not had the best defense ever. Their only real example of defense was against Michigan, but let's be real, Michigan doesn't have a very good offense. The rest of the season, while Indiana has been holding their opponents to very little points, they have also just been destroying them offensively. I think Ohio State's offense will have a easier time scoring points than they have most this season, but I think Indiana's offense is going to put the pound on this Ohio State defense. And maybe the Indiana defense can cause some crucial turnovers, maybe some crucial sacks, considering the Ohio State O-line is kind of struggling right now. They're missing some starters, some key starters and whatnot. Maybe Indiana will load up the line at proper times and get pressure on Will Howard. Maybe make him make a mistake or just sack him and whatnot. You never know. But I think Indiana will go on the road and beat Ohio State. Wake Forest at Miami. I'm just taking Dolphins pictures for Miami because, dude, there's no fans that show up to the Miami games. And there's not even pictures of Miami games except for the Dolphins. So guess what? The Miami Dolphins get to host Wake Forest, and they're going to kill them, simply. Ole Miss at Florida. I think it's pretty easy to pick Florida here, but Florida is coming off of a heater. Florida's coming off of a heater against LSU, and even though in our eyes it doesn't look that good, Florida and Florida fans will, and they're hyped. And they get a back-to-back in their home stadium with DJ Lagway leading the way. I think Florida honestly has been competing actually pretty well behind the scenes this season. Aside from their horrendous start to the year against Miami, they went into overtime on the road against Tennessee. They played 4 quarters with Georgia. Texas wasn't really competition, but there was major injuries in that. And then they took down LSU as their big their big win for this season. Now they get to host number 9 Ole Miss. And while I was looking at it, I was like, hey, Ole Miss has got a free schedule to win the SEC or to win out and get a college football playoff spot. I think Ole Miss has shown us example after example of dropping bad games. I mean, LSU, I don't really know what they are because they're a 4-loss team, but they have all right wins and whatnot. LSU has had one of the hardest schedules in the SEC, and they haven't prevailed, but LSU ended up beating this Ole Miss team, and while that's a big rivalry, and it was at LSU, that does not excuse Ole Miss for their Kentucky loss. And while Kentucky has really struggled in the SEC, they have played the top dogs really well. I mean, you look at Kentucky, they are 4-6, like second to last in the conference, with a 1-point loss to Georgia, a 3-point win over Ole Miss, a 10-point loss to Tennessee on the road, in which that game was also like 4 quarters. Kentucky may not be like the worst performing team against the best teams, but the problem is Ole Miss actually lost that game. I think we could see a super defensive matchup with Florida getting up early with momentum, and then just Ole Miss being Ole Miss and dropping a bad finish to this game. Like Florida gets up 14-0. It remains like 14-0, 14-3 in like the fourth quarter before Ole Miss starts to come back before Florida makes a final push for a field goal and wins the game type shite. I think Florida can win this game. SMU at Virginia, another sneaky game. SMU is favored by 10 points, and Virginia is 5-5, coming off of a domination at Notre Dame. But let's not forget, Virginia has a road win against Pitt. They had a 17-point loss against Clemson, but it was 31-48, a 4-point loss against Louisville, and they have been pretty competitive with their conference. The only game they weren't competitive in was the North Carolina game, which is kind of interesting, but that's kind of just what happens in the mid-tier games. They drop shit like that. This is at Virginia. This is their last prove-it game, and SMU has been playing very good at home, but poorly on the road. And even at home, they've kind of struggled. But, like, on the road, barely escaped Louisville in a very close game. Barely, literally should have lost to Duke, but Duke blew it. Should have lost to Duke. And aside from that, they also beat Nevada by 5 points on the road. But their home games, you beat BYU. You kill Pitt. And then you ended up beating Boston College by 10. And there's other like games in there that are just dominations against like random teams. Their only good road performance was against Stanford, but like let's be real. SMU plays at Virginia, and Virginia I feel like could make this game a sneaky competition. I've got SMU barely winning one. And Virginia just dropping one again because it's Virginia, but I think Virginia, hear me out, there could be major upset potential here. Favoring SMU by 10 points kind of seems like a lot, and unless there's an injury that I'm not seeing on the Virginia ball, I think SMU might struggle on this game. If SMU's got some major injury that I don't know about, then shit could change real fast, but as of right now, I don't know. And I think this Virginia team, I've been talking about them all year. They haven't ended up being what I thought they would be, but they're also not the worst thing ever. And I think they could potentially cause a ruckus. Illinois at Rutgers. Illinois back in the top 25 for some reason. Illinois' only good win, they're like seriously, Illinois' only good win on the season is, I'm not saying Michigan. I'm not saying Nebraska. I'm saying Kansas, because Kansas is starting to look really good right now. And like Kansas is starting to look really good right now. But in terms of Nebraska and Michigan, they're in the bottom half of the conference, and they're not very good right now. Nebraska could honestly lose out and become not bowl eligible. That would be pretty funny. But Illinois hasn't really played much competition outside of that Kansas game, which they had the luxury of being in their home stadium. They're back in the top 25, and a team that everybody has forgotten about is Rutgers, because Rutgers went on a bad run. They lost by 7 to Nebraska in a close game, but then they got killed by Wisconsin, dropped one to UCLA, and dropped one to USC before a big bounce-back win against Minnesota, and then a big road win against Maryland. I think Rutgers is finding their footing, and they're going to take down Illinois. I do think Illinois has been, like, I think they have a good head coach, and they have resiliency, and they can perform in the big games, but the problem is this is not a big game. Like the Penn State game, they were competitive. Kansas game, obviously competitive. And the Oregon game was not very competitive, but I guess the Michigan game was competitive. So, yeah, I think Rutgers win this one. Kentucky at Texas. So, I skipped a couple games. I know I said I wouldn't do this anymore, but it's Georgia it's Georgia hosting UMass, Tennessee hosting UTEP. Like the lines are 40 plus. Like I don't care. Texas at Kentucky, or Texas hosts Kentucky. Let me just talk about Texas for a second. They are number 3 in the nation, and they probably have one of the easiest SEC schedules out there, aside from their last game of the season. I mean, their only games that really gassed up Texas was the early win against Michigan, and then the Red River rivalry. Which both of those teams are no longer ranked, not even close to the ranking. They get to play Georgia, and then they get killed in their home stadium. Road game against Vanderbilt, who's no longer a top 25 team as well. They win by 3. And so basically, Texas has not beaten a ranked opponent, a currently ranked opponent. Unless I am missing one. I don't think Vanderbilt, no, they don't have a win against a ranked opponent right now. That's pretty shocking if you're asking me. And I just talked about Kentucky earlier. They have performed very well in the big games, and I expect them to do so the same here. It's just been Kentucky this season. They have just played this way. You know, a 1-point loss against Georgia, a 3-point win over Ole Miss on the road, a 10-point loss against Tennessee on the road, but it was a 3-point game until 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Like, Kentucky is sneaky good. Kentucky is sneaky good, but then they just look absolutely awful in their other games. They drop a bad one to Florida, drop one to Vanderbilt, which was close, and Vanderbilt was a respectable team. But then they drop one to Auburn, get killed by South Carolina. Like, there's just examples of Kentucky not performing good. But Kentucky's also fighting for bowl eligibility right now. So that could be an incentive for this Kentucky team, as well as it's number 3. And nobody is regarding Kentucky in this game. I think they could make this game a pretty all right competition. Penn State at Minnesota. Don't be fooled. Minnesota is 6-4, and their only good win is against Illinois. Illinois is not that good. Minnesota has a loss to North Carolina, who is a mid-tier team in the ACC, as well as they got dominated by Iowa. And they have a 7-point win over what was ranked number 11 USC. And then they hit the road and beat Illinois. But they've most recently lost on the road to Rutgers. And now they play Penn State. And Penn State is favored by only 11.5. And I think that will be handled. Minnesota has a pretty decent defense, if anything. They have a pretty decent defense, but they haven't played an offense like Penn State yet. I mean, really, when you look at Minnesota's opponents, like the only offensive teams they ended up playing was Maryland. Maryland dropped 23, but Minnesota in return dropped 48 and dominated offensively in a game they finally could just run free in, and they were on a heater during that time. But it has come crashing to an end, in my opinion, with a loss against Rutgers, and now you get to host Penn State, which this is probably going to be a pretty good game, 4 quarters. I expect Minnesota fans to show up, but I've got Penn State winning. BYU at Arizona State University. If Indiana, Ohio State wasn't playing this week, unfortunately they are. This would be the game of the week. I have had this game pretty much bookmarked on ASU's schedule since BYU got ranked. I've been excited for this game for the whole year because it's at home. Now, I am worried because there's a lot of BYU fans that live in the Valley, as well as Utah is a border away. I mean, they could very well travel to this game. And, man, tickets are like $300 for this ASU game. Now, I am going, of course, but tickets are damn $300. Like, this shit destroyed me. It destroyed me. But BYU at Arizona State University. BYU, the thing about them is they have not been performing good in their past few games. Barely beat Oklahoma State. Does not look good for BYU. Beat UCF pretty good on the road. Barely snuck one out against Utah, which was kind of determined by officials. And then they finally lost to Kansas and BYU's home stadium. But I think the problem here is, and why this game isn't going to go how people probably expect it to, is BYU has had the burden. Like, it's a gift and a curse at the same time of being undefeated in number 6. But the problem is you have to hold on to that undefeated record, and every team wants to take it away from you. Kansas did that. BYU gets to take a sigh of relief. And now that ASU is the favorite, BYU has kind of returned to their original position where nobody believes in them. And that, I believe, could cause some issues here. However, ASU, I don't think they're going to let this get to their head because ASU has been in the same position all year. Nobody has regarded them. They've quietly won a ton of games. They're 8-2. And ASU, they've been in that position all year, and they're even like the players came out and said, it's like, now you guys want to talk about us, now you guys want to respect us. Like, fuck that. Like, that's just dumb shit. And this is going to be this is probably the biggest game in ASU history for a very long time, until like 1998 or something like that. ASU has not had this good of a record since like 2013. We have not had this much hype around a singular game since 2013, 2014. 2013, 2014 were our last good years. Since then, it has been nothing but mediocre and just good players, but not good enough to win games, apparently. But ASU is here now. Number 21 versus number 14. I think ASU is going to take it. Now, the thing here is, I actually had this as Kansas State versus ASU. I had ASU losing by this. I think ASU, the thing is, okay, let me just talk about ASU for a second. Why not? ASU has a quarterback named Sam Leavitt. This is a fact. He is a dog. He's a freshman, and he's currently ranked as, like, I mean, some websites, some rankings will have it differently, but he's pretty much a top 10 quarterback in college football. He has just 4 interceptions on the year, which honestly, some of which, if you watch ASU, weren't even his fault. I remember in the Kansas game, a pass went through the receiver's hands. It hit him right in the hands. It would have been a catch and a touchdown, but instead it went right through his hands and ended up being an interception for the other team. He also, in the Utah game, tried to throw a pass, and the O-line let the defender get a hand on the ball, which flailed in the air, and a D lineman picked it off with one arm. 2 of his 4 interceptions, I don't remember what the other ones were, but 2 of his 4 interceptions were, like, not even really his fault, while the pressure on the quarterback one could be, maybe just be more active in the pocket, more aware, but the one where it goes to his receiver's hands, that's nothing he can do. So at the very least, 3 interceptions. That is still absolutely like a beautiful performance by a quarterback. I mean, you can't ask for anything more. On the other side of things, on the floor, you have Cameron Skattebo, who was in the Heisman race for a bit before he got hurt against UCF. Or hurt for the game against UCF. And then he didn't really play, like, the craziest game against Kansas State. He still tallied, I think, like 100 yards or something like that overall. But still, he is still a massive threat. But I think the thing here is, the dealio here is BYU has a pretty good rush defense. So they're probably going to expect to shut down Cameron Skattebo, at least from what I see. BYU has a pretty good run defense. I'm scrolling through all the games right here. Running backs did not have an easy time, have not had an easy time against this BYU team. I don't know, though, because 2 examples are Oklahoma State and UCF, which I would say ASU has probably better run games to them. UCF might have a better run game than ASU, but still, Cam Skattebo is a force of nature. And then another thing is, you've got the receiver, Jordan Tyson, who is currently tied in touchdown catches with Travis Hunter. He's currently tied in touchdown catches with Travis Hunter. That is insane. Don't take this the wrong way. I'm not comparing Jordan Tyson to Travis Hunter as a player. I'm comparing him to him offensively, because Travis Hunter, he plays cornerback. There is such a huge gap there. He plays cornerback. That's insane. But offensively, I mean, Jordan Tyson is up there in competition with Travis Hunter offensively. And just that alone, like, you've got a star receiver, a star running back, and a up-and-coming star quarterback. Like, that is a lot to handle defensively. You've got to constantly be aware. You've got to constantly lock it down. Can BYU do that? I'm not really too sure. Now, BYU's defense has definitely been their strong point this year. But Arizona State's defense on the other side of things has also been one of the more lockdown defenses in the Big 12. I mean, where there is super highly offensive teams, when they go up against ASU, they're not putting up points like they normally do. Cincinnati, for instance, Cincinnati has been one of the highly offensive teams this year, dropping loads of yards, at least in the first half. They've kind of slowed down in the second half. ASU held them to just 24 points. Texas Tech. Texas Tech has been interesting to say the least. They have been mostly offensive, but they've slowed down again at the end of the year, sort of. Their Iowa State game, they didn't put up much, but Texas Tech against TCU, they 34 against Baylor, 35 against Cincinnati, 44, and Cincinnati put up 41 in that game. Like, they definitely have a really high-powered offense and a great running back. ASU also, Kansas, while that is probably the highest scoring game, the UCF game, where there are super solid offenses, Kansas has had a great offense all year. I've been preaching that. UCF has a running back leader in the country right now. ASU has been holding them to at least less points than their offense has put up. And the most impressive performance defensively was this recent weekend against Kansas State, where they were shutting down the team on fourth down. They were creating turnovers. They were not given turnovers against Kansas State. They were not given. They were made plays. The interception was a deflected pass that our player hit up in the air, and our other player had to come running across the field, dive, and pick it off. Another fumble was a strip from behind the back, and it popped loose, and ASU picked it up. They were not givens. They were a fumble is never really a given, but that the interception was not a given. Like, they were created plays. They were fabulous plays. If ASU's defense can carry that mentality into this game and give ASU more turnovers like they have, I think ASU stands a really solid chance at beating BYU. But on the other side of the spectrum, BYU is finally obtaining their first loss, and they dropped 8 spots in the polls. They're probably pissed. BYU fans are probably pissed. They're going to have a lot of passion going into this game, and you could expect a great game between these two, in my opinion. Enough yapping about this. Colorado at Kansas. You might think it's a mistake that I left the ASU background on, but it's not, because this is ASU's game. This is also ASU's game. ASU is controlling their destiny to the Big 12 championship. They have the opportunity to take down BYU, hit them with their second loss, and take the spot over them. Colorado has to play at Kansas. Kansas is on an absolute heater. Not only is Deion Sanders' prime time coming to town, which you can expect the fans to show up anytime that's going to happen, Kansas is on an absolute heater right now. The fans, it's an Arrowhead Stadium. The fans showed up for the Iowa State game. The fans, I don't really know if they showed up too much for the BYU game, but the team showed up for the BYU game. Kansas has won against 2 ranked opponents back-to-back, and they get their 3rd ranked opponent in their home stadium, and it's prime time. You can expect this game to have a lot of emotion and a lot of fans, and I think Kansas is going to continue on the path they were going. I didn't have faith in them. I expected them to perform well against BYU, but I thought they were going to return to their ways. They didn't. They won again, and I just think the power behind these teams right now, Devin Neal, Jalen Daniels, the receiver who is a dog there that I haven't really taken note of his name this season, but he's great. And then the cornerbacks on Kansas, it's going to be a match. It's going to be a match. Kobe Bryant has been a great cornerback. I hope he's not hurt, but I expect him to most likely go up against Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter's obviously in this game. Shedeur, Shiloh. It's going to be a great match, and I think the passion is going to be there for Kansas. While Colorado has overcome these obstacles all season and performs really well under these circumstances, I think Kansas is going to continue on their path. Missouri at Mississippi State. Missouri performed very well and impressed me against South Carolina. But the thing that did not impress me, and in fact made me annoyed and very pissed off, was the fact that Missouri did not drop out of the top 25. They stayed completely still, which I think is the biggest pile of bullshit ever, because if you want to talk about keeping SEC teams, all of them up in the top 10 almost, the way you do it is keeping Missouri as a top 25 team to make it look like their dominations over Missouri are just how good they are type shit. Missouri is not a top 25 team. Not anymore, at least. They lost to South Carolina. It was competitive, but they are not. They got shut out by Alabama and killed by A&M. And Mississippi State has, again, been quietly, since they made a quarterback change, they have been quietly competing, to say the least. They have been competing, I would say, fairly well. They haven't been winning. That's the problem. They're kind of falling into a Kansas position, but they've been quietly competing. The only games they didn't compete in were Arkansas and Tennessee, where Tennessee, they had to go on the road, and Arkansas desperately needed a win there. Mississippi State only lost by 10 points to A&M and 10 points to Georgia, which are really solid performances in my opinion. And I think Mississippi State, coming off of a bye week as well, is ready to host Missouri. I think Mississippi State, there we go. I think Mississippi State takes one against Missouri. I think they do. Suck it, baby. I think they win. Army at Notre Dame. Last time I said we can expect an offensive matchup. Army dropped to 14-3, but I think we can expect an offensive matchup. Notre Dame has a very solid defense, like one of the best, if not the best defense in the nation in reality. I think Notre Dame can do a relatively good job of shutting down this Army team. But I think Army's offense is better than Navy's, which Notre Dame looked really good against Navy. I think Army's offense is better, way better than Navy's. But Notre Dame is also going to have a pretty easy time against Army's defense. So I think Notre Dame is taking one. I think they're going to continue on their path of dominance. Boise State at Wyoming. Wyoming is 2-8. So you can expect Boise State to win this one. But Wyoming actually has competed fairly well throughout the season. They have had a lot of close losses, a lot of close games, and they're coming off of a win. They're coming off of a win against New Mexico, who just beat Washington State. So Wyoming, I almost wonder if this is just like their win it game. Like, this is just the game they're going to perform, but I'm going to take Boise State, but in a close one. Alabama, Oklahoma. I mean, it's at Oklahoma, so maybe the fans will show up, but Alabama is pretty good at football. Texas at Auburn. You can expect Auburn to just keep going down the road. 28-17. I don't know. Just maybe it'll be like Auburn's lead at some point, like 14-17, before they just throw the game away. And our last game of the week, Iowa State at Utah. Iowa State had lost to Texas Tech in their home stadium. Lost to Kansas on the road. Bounced back with the win against Cincinnati, but now they have to hit a Utah team that is furious. A Utah team that has, quite frankly, been screwed out of a game against BYU and is itching for a ranked win right now. Itching for a win right now. I think Utah, with this quarterback, is starting to improve. And if the fans show up, which I do believe they will, I've got Utah winning this one. In a close game, but I've got them winning. Let me know what you guys think about this week of games. A like and subscribe would help. A comment always helps. That's all for me. Adios.